Chapter 4 Old Skinflint's Son. I must down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by, and the wheels kick and the wind's song and the white sails shaking, and a gray mist on the sea's face and a gray dawn breaking. Macefield. 2 hours later, a secretary showed Bert into Hargrave's office. Without looking up, Hargrave, who was bending over some papers, motioned Bert to a seat. The boy amused himself while he waited by studying the half-models of ships' hulls that projected from the walls, and the photographs and paintings of full-rigged ships, barks, barkentines, and schooners. All of them were, or had been, salmon packets, owned by the Nushagak Salmon Company. As an old sailing skipper, Hargrave, Bert knew, felt genuine grief at the gradual replacement of the old windjammers with steamers. Surely it must cost more to run the steamers and maintain them through idle winters. Must the fine old sailing vessels be driven out of service, even in the highly seasonal salmon trade where speed was not important? At any rate, it was some consolation to know that in his father's company, of which he would perhaps become a part, the gallant ships were making their last fight for the right to sail the seas. "Your union card is ready for you." Hargrave's voice broke into Bert's reverie. "Get it at the Alaska Fishermen's Union headquarters, Maritime Hall on Clay Street. It'll cost you $10 to join." Bert thanked him, then told him about Beth's encounter with the pock-marked man at Pier 50. Of course, it might not be the same man. Hargrave looked troubled. "A 17-year-old girl has no business on the waterfront alone," he said. "Both jobs look like the work of a fanatic, and the police could easily get such a man. But..." He paused. "I wondered last night why you didn't tell the police," Bert ventured. "Because," said Hargrave, "instead of a fanatic, he may be merely a hireling, the tool of someone higher up, and in that case we would only be warning that higher up. That's just a hunch. Take it for what it's worth and tuck it under your hat." Hargrave began turning over his papers again. Bert took the hint and departed, heading at once for the Union headquarters. There, a great brawny man at a much battered old-fashioned roll-top desk handed him his card. "So you think you're a sailor, do you? Know anything about ships?" Bert resented the little curl at the corners of the big man's mouth, but when he looked at the man's 200 pounds of bone and sinew, he felt that his own 140-pound body was frail and inadequate. "As to being a sailor," he answered, with more meekness in his voice than he had intended to show, "I'll do my best, and I've sailed all kinds of yachts. Fore and afters, of course." "Yachts?" the man guffawed. "I said ships. Knowing how to sail yachts will do you about as much good when you're aloft in a square rigger as being a champion at tiddlywinks. But at that," he added more soberly, "you're about as well off as a lot of the men we have to send. And here's a tip, kid. Don't let the men find out you're A.K. Lindsay's boy." "You mean..." Bert stammered. "Sure, I mean... Hargrave told me who you are, but I wouldn't spread the good word if I was you. It wouldn't be... healthy." The man turned away and seemed to have forgotten Bert's presence. Bert felt his wrath rising. What right did an official at the Fishermen's Union have to treat him as though he were a rather disagreeable joke, the son of the president of the company? But no, that was the wrong way to go at it. If he were going to be a sailor, he had to expect to be treated like one. But why wouldn't it be healthy to have the sailors know that he was A.K. Lindsay's son? What did the sailors have against his dad? Naturally, he wasn't going to run about the decks bragging that he was the son of the president. No sane chap would do that. Still, the union official's tone had carried a note of warning, as though there were actual danger. The man had seemed friendly, too, despite his brusque manner. That twist at the corners of his mouth. It was a smile bent by hard knocks, rather than a sneer. Before Bert had walked the half-dozen blocks to the Nushagak Salmon Company's office, he found himself liking the man. But there were other things to think about. The 1,000 details of getting ready. What clothing to take, what books, how many films for his camera, how many blankets. Except for a fleeting thought now and then, there was little time to worry about the unanswerable questions that Hargrave, the pock-marked man, the union official, had raised in his mind. Use your eyes and ears. Try to understand. That was a sort of football dummy, which he could tackle with all questions that seemed to have no answers. When Bert reached the company's office, the men were already lined up for the formality of signing on. Signing the ship's articles, Bert thrilled. Now he was to see all of his shipmates for the first time. In a narrow passageway, he was herded into line according to number by a brisk young clerk. A dour old man with hunched shoulders stood just ahead of him, and behind him a burly Scandinavian. One of them, Bert supposed, would be his fishing partner when the fishing season opened on Bristol Bay. He wondered vaguely why nothing had been said to him about a partner. Men usually chose their own. "Mates first," called a voice from the counter at the head of the line. "Then idlers, then seamen and fishermen. Have your cards ready." At intervals of a minute or less, the voice called, "Chief mate, second mate, third mate, ship's doctor, steward, cook, baker, carpenter." Bert glanced at the men as they filed past on their way out. The tall man who looked as though he were used to giving orders, that would be the chief mate. The fellow with the black pointed beard, the doctor, of course. He was replacing his card in a small notebook as he passed Bert. His hands, Bert noted, were not too well washed, and his nails were ragged and dirty. "Cripes," the boy thought. "I hope he never has to cut me open with those hands." Clip clump, clip clump. Bert turned from the doctor to see a man with a sailor's gait and a wooden leg rolling past. To himself, Bert chuckled. "Captain John Silver himself. Wonder if he's the cook." The big man behind the boy addressed him. "What's your yob, sonny? Wireless?" "No," Bert answered. "I'm going as sailor, seaman," he corrected himself, with a glance at his card, which read, "Bert Lindsay, number 28, ordinary seaman and fisherman." He was beginning to sense that there was a difference between a seaman and a sailor. "As seaman you're going, you? Let's see your card." He took it out of Bert's hand. "Well, yumping codfish if you ain't. Ever sail before, sonny?" "Sure. I've sailed lots of times." Bert knew better than to mention yachts. "So your name's Lindsay," the man went on, still holding Bert's card tightly. "Any relation to old Skinflint?" "Who's he?" Bert asked, his heart pounding. "Aye, you know, old Skinflint Lindsay, the president of this Rattle-me-bones outfit." Bert's heart seemed to be stuck in his throat. Old Skinflint? So that's what the men called his dad? A lie. A lie. It wasn't true. Why, his dad was the most generous man alive. But here was an immediate question which had to be answered. Was he any relation to his dad? What should he say? Suddenly it struck Bert that the truth is sometimes far more absurd and unbelievable than a lie. "Relation?" he laughed. "Sure, he's my old man." The big man laughed deep in his throat, then remembered where he was and choked his laugh off short. "Your old man, yah! Better you tell that to somebody else." The line was gradually moving forward. The seamen were signing on now, and filing down the passageway on their way out. Mostly Scandinavians, Bert decided, with one or two Italians, one who was unmistakably German, and one who might be English. "Number 24, the voice called. It would soon be Bert's turn. Bert Lindsay, son of old Skinflint Lindsay. Two men stepped forward, signed their names 3 times each, and tramped out. "Number 26. A shrunken little man in a dark suit, who had been entirely concealed from Bert's sight by the old man in front of him, stepped up to the counter. Bert started. Where had he seen that sharp, pale face, those glinting eyes before? The thin lips drew back over yellow teeth in an involuntary grimace. Then Bert remembered. The man on the cable car, on whom he had spilled the water from his hat brim. Was he to be a shipmate? "Speakin' for Pete Condon." The man's thin voice was rasping. "He's sick, and can I sign on for him?" "Sick your grandmother," the voice barked. "You mean drunk. Have him here at 5 o'clock sober enough to write his own name, or he don't go." Bert watched the shrunken man sidle away and scurry down the passage, feeling somehow relieved that the fellow's grimacing face was not to be on the ship. "Number 27. The old man signed the papers and trampled heavily away. "Number 28. Come on, snap out of it. Where's your card? Sign here, and here, and here. Sail Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock. Report aboard ship tomorrow night." Past the few remaining seamen, Bert went, and out the door. He glanced up and down the street, trying to remember what was to be done next, and took a deep breath. Bert Lindsay, son of old Skinflint Lindsay, the president of the Rattle Me Bones Company, was signed on the Queen of Asia as ordinary seaman and fisherman. No, he wouldn't forget that occasion in a hurry. He could pack tomorrow. The most important thing now was to talk to his father. He swung into another entrance of the company building, glanced hastily around to see that none of the Queen of Asia's crew was in sight, and entered his father's office. But instead of talking to his father, Bert listened while his father talked. Poor runs of fish for several seasons, close competition from other companies, the difficulty of getting good men. The Nushagak Salmon Company was really not far from bankruptcy, which of course meant bankruptcy for the company's president and largest stockholder. The Bristol Bay and Chignik Fisheries Corporation had absorbed several smaller companies and wanted to buy out the Nushagak Salmon Company. The big corporation would use any means, fair or foul, to force the sale at its own price. "I'll admit to you what I've never admitted to anybody else, Bert," Mr. Lindsay said, "that I am handicapped by having risen to this position through the office instead of through the ships and canneries, like Mr. Hargrave, for instance. I don't like the idea of your going as a seaman, but since you took me at my word and got the job, you can perhaps be of real assistance to me. Use your eyes and ears, get the point of view of the seamen and fishermen, and try to find out why the best men prefer to go with other companies." He paused, apparently deep in thought. Bert's head was humming. Use your eyes and ears. Here it was again, but at least his father explained what he meant by it. Did Hargrave mean something different? Why didn't somebody answer questions for a change instead of just asking them and leaving them unanswered? "One more thing," his father went on. "The skippers of our sailing ships seem to think that they're sailing clipper ships instead of salmon packets. Captain Hagerstrom of the Queen of Asia is one of them. My idea is that they've got romantic notions from reading books like The Clipper Ship Era. An interesting book, to be sure, but times have changed. Find out how much of their howl for new gear is justified." When Bert rose to go, his father grasped his hand. "Need any money for an outfit, son?" he asked. Bert shook his head. He was unable to speak. They called this man Old Skinflint? Bert had noticed before, in the week he had been home, how tired his father's eyes looked, how, when he relaxed for a moment, his whole body seemed to droop with weariness. His father was terribly worried about something. "Is it Mother and the girls?" Bert blurted suddenly. Mr. Lindsay seemed to understand what was in his son's mind. "Partly," he said, with a wan smile. "They don't seem to understand that money has to be earned. But don't you worry about it, my boy. We'll work this thing out somehow. We won't go under if we can help it. But if we do, we'll go under fighting. Your mother and sisters are extravagant, it's true, but after all, they deserve the best I can give them." Bert's eyes filled with tears. He left the office quickly. He couldn't speak of this to his mother, and his older sister, Mary, would laugh at him. But Beth might be a thoughtless flapper, but he could make her understand. He would have it out with Beth.